Imagine being offered everything you've ever dreamed of, only to find out it comes with invisible chains. That was the choice humanity faced on a Tuesday morning in Geneva, when the stars finally answered back. In the heart of the United Nations, Ambassador Vetharani of the Saluri stood, a living statue nearly 10 feet tall, her scales shimmering from deep blue to silver. Her ancient golden eyes held the weight of millennia. She was old, even for a species that measured life in centuries. What would you do in our shoes? Stick around to find out what happened. She had witnessed the birth and death of empires and had personally welcomed over 200 species into the galactic concord. To her, this was just another day at the office. She was flanked by delegates from 12 other worlds, a walking mountain of stone and fur named Korath, a shimmering being of pure light called Minster Yell, and others, each more bizarre than the last, representing trillions of souls across the galaxy. They had come to invite Earth into their cosmic family. The humans in the audience could only stare, a cocktail of awe and anxiety churning inside them. At the front sat Secretary General Elena Vasquez, her face a calm, unreadable mask. At 53, she was a master diplomat, having spent her life navigating the treacherous waters between nations. Now, she had to navigate the currents between worlds. Vetharani raised her arms, a universal gesture of peace. Her voice, smooth and timeless, echoed through every translation device. "People of Earth," she began. "For 12,000 years, the galactic concord has kept the peace. 347 species now live as one, sharing wisdom, technology, and a dream of unity. Today, we extend that same hand to you." She paused, letting the historic words sink in. "We have observed your world for a very long time. We've seen your conflicts, your pain, and your struggles. But we've also seen your incredible art, your relentless spirit, and your capacity to grow. You are a young race, but one with immense potential. And so the Concord makes you an offer given to every species that reaches the stars." A hologram bloomed in the air before her, displaying a document written in soft, glowing blue light. "The Treaty of Integration," Vetharani announced. "It is a standard agreement that has ensured prosperity for all who have signed it. Under this treaty, humanity will become a provisional member of the Concord. You will gain access to galactic trade. You will receive technology that will leap your civilization forward by thousands of years, and you will be shielded by the combined might of our 347 member worlds. No enemy will ever threaten your planet again." A wave of excited whispers swept through the human delegation. It was everything they had ever wished for: safety, knowledge, and a seat at the galactic table. But Elena Vasquez wasn't smiling. Her eyes were glued to the holographic text, slowly dissecting every line. Vetharani noticed. "Of course," the ambassador added smoothly. "Membership carries certain responsibilities, traditions that have served us well for 12 millennia." She started listing them off, her tone so casual you'd think she was discussing the weather. "First, your military forces and vessels will be turned over to Concord control. This is a standard peacekeeping measure. Our forces will protect you, so you will no longer have a need for your own." A few of the human generals stiffened. Admiral Chen Wei, the commander of Earth's fledgling space fleet, leaned forward, a deep frown creasing his brow. "Second," Vetharani went on, "your population growth will be regulated to ensure galactic sustainability. Resources are vast, but not infinite." The murmurs returned, this time laced with concern. That meant humanity could never expand beyond its current population. No new colonies, no growth. Third, all resource allocation will be managed by Concord economic councils to prevent waste and ensure fairness. This was the knockout blow. Earth's industries, its mines, its entire economy, all handed over to alien accountants. And finally, the fourth point. Provisional members will accept guidance councils made up of senior species. These councils will advise your governments to ensure your development aligns with conquered values. Elena Vasquez finally looked up. Advise? She asked, her voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through the room. Or control? Vitharani's scales gave a subtle flutter. Guidance, she repeated. We have the wisdom of experience. We help young races like yours avoid the mistakes we once made. Whose mistakes? Vasquez pressed. Yours or ours? A tense silence fell. The other alien delegates shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't part of the script. New species were supposed to be grateful. The mistakes of all young species, Vitharani said carefully. We provide a shortcut through the chaos of adolescence. It is a gift. Vasquez gave a slow nod, her eyes sweeping over the worried faces of her fellow humans. Ambassador, she said, how long does this provisional membership typically last? Until the guidance councils decide a species is mature enough for full membership. It varies. What's the average? Vasquez insisted. Vitharani hesitated for a fraction of a second. Approximately 800 standard years. A collective gasp rippled through the humans. 800 years. That was 40 generations of humanity living as a protectorate. 40 generations without self-defense, economic freedom, or the right to govern themselves. And if we decline? Vasquez asked. The air became still. Even the aliens seemed to hold their breath. No species has ever declined, Vitharani said, her voice losing its warmth. The benefits are too great, and the alternative, she let the word hang in the air. The galaxy is a dangerous place for a species that stands alone. There are threats out there you can't even fathom. That sounds like a threat, Admiral Chen snapped, his patience gone. It is a fact, Vitharani replied, her voice now cold as ice. We maintain the peace. Species outside our framework are agents of instability. They are a threat to that peace, and we have ways of encouraging cooperation. The message was crystal clear. Join us, or we will make you. Slowly, Elena Vasquez rose to her feet. She was a small woman, dwarfed by the towering aliens, but in that moment, she held the attention of the entire room. Ambassador Vitharani, she said, her voice steady. Thank you for this offer. We understand the great honor you have bestowed upon us by coming here today. She looked from the hopeful, frightened faces of the humans to the arrogant, confident faces of the aliens. However, she continued, this is the single most important decision in the history of our species. We will need time to consider it. Vitharani gave a gracious nod. Of course. We will remain in orbit for 30 of your days. That should be ample time for you to review the terms and prepare for integration. Prepare for integration, Vasquez repeated softly. Not decide whether to integrate. The decision, Secretary General, is a formality, Vitharani stated. It was made 12,000 years ago. All who reach for the stars join the conquered. It is the way of things. You have 30 days to accept that reality. With that, the aliens turned and left, leaving humanity to grapple with its impossible choice. That night, Elena Vasquez sat in her office, reading the treaty over and over. She dug into the history of the conquered, and what she found chilled her to the bone. She discovered records of species that resisted integration and were pacified by military force. She read about vibrant cultures and languages that were slowly smothered, deemed destabilizing by the conquered. Behind the mask of a benevolent guardian, she saw the face of a ruthless tyrant. The next morning, she called an emergency meeting. The room buzzed with the world's most powerful leaders, all terrified by the choice before them. We can't fight them, the president of the European Federation said, his voice trembling. Their technology is centuries, maybe millennia, beyond ours. We have no choice but to accept. Their armada could annihilate every last ship we have. But we can't just surrender, Admiral Chen shot back. You saw the same reports I did. The second we lay down our arms, we're at their mercy for good. We'd be facing 800 years of slavery, and that's the best-case scenario. There has to be another way, the Indian Prime Minister urged. Maybe we can negotiate a better deal. Vasquez just shook her head. They were crystal clear. The terms are the terms. It's the same treaty they've used for 12,000 years. They don't negotiate because they've never lost. So what's the plan then? The American president asked, his voice heavy. Choose between chains and annihilation? Vasquez rose and walked over to the window. Outside, the sun was just beginning to climb over Geneva, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of gold and red. Somewhere high above that gorgeous sunrise, an alien fleet was waiting to decide the fate of all mankind. I've been wrestling with that exact question all night, she said softly, and my mind keeps going back to a moment in our own history. In 1940, Great Britain was all alone, facing down the entire Nazi war machine. Every logical analysis said they were finished. They were outmanned, outgunned, and completely surrounded. But they refused to surrender. They fought back, and with a little help, they eventually won. Someone chimed in. But they had allies. Yes, Vasquez agreed, turning from the window. They did. And we might too. The Concord has 347 member species. You really think every single one of them is happy with the arrangement? You think none of them miss what it felt like to be free? The room fell silent as her words sank in. But first, she went on, before we go looking for friends, before we can even dream of resisting, we have to do something that no one in the history of the galaxy has ever dared to do. She turned to face the leaders, her eyes glinting with steel. We have to tell them no. The next 30 days were the most frantic in the history of the human race. On paper, Earth was simply reviewing the Concord's generous offer. In reality, humanity was gearing up for war. Fleets were quietly repositioned to defend Earth and the 42 colony worlds the Concord knew nothing about. That's right, 42. In the 60 years since humanity figured out faster-than-light travel, we'd been busy. We found new homes and settled them without telling a soul, because we trusted no one. It was a secret we had kept so well. Most of our own people didn't know the full extent of it, with each colony only aware of a handful of others. Now, that secrecy was about to become our trump card. Scientists worked around the clock, poring over every byte of data they could get on Concord tech, hunting for a weakness. Military strategists drafted desperate defense plans. Engineers rushed to reinforce orbital stations and planetary shields, and Elena Vasquez practiced her speech. On the 30th day, she boarded a shuttle and ascended to the Siluri flagship. Ambassador Vetharani greeted her in the same conference room as before, flanked by the same intimidating delegation of alien officials. Secretary General, Vetharani said with a warm, confident smile, I trust your people have come to the wise decision. Vasquez smiled back. It wasn't a warm smile at all. We have made a decision, she confirmed. I'm here to deliver it in person, just as you delivered your offer to us. She let her gaze sweep across the room, taking in the bizarre assembly of aliens, creatures made of living stone and pure light, beings with scales and shells, and one form she couldn't even begin to describe. They all watched her with the easy patience of predators who had never once tasted defeat. On behalf of the United Nations of Earth and every human territory, Vasquez announced, her voice ringing out clear and strong, I thank you for your offer of membership in the Galactic Concord. She paused for a beat, and in that tiny moment of silence, the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. We decline. The silence that came next was absolute. Vetharani's golden eyes went wide, and her scales flickered through a rainbow of colors that had no names on Earth. All around her, the other delegates were a mess of shock, confusion, and rising anger. I don't understand, Ftharani stammered at last. Perhaps there was a translation error. There's no error, Vasquez said calmly. We decline. We will not surrender our military. We will not accept your population controls. We will not hand over our economy to alien managers, and we will not be governed by foreign councils. This is unheard of, a rocky-faced alien rumbled, his features literally cracking with emotion. No species has ever... There's a first time for everything, Vasquez cut in smoothly, and humanity has always had a knack for being first. She took a step forward, and though she was small, she suddenly seemed to command the entire room. Instead, we offer a different kind of deal. An equal partnership, mutual defense pacts between sovereign powers, free trade, without your economic thumb on the scale, cultural exchange without cultural erasure, friendship without chains. Ftharani finally found her voice. You can't be serious. You're one species, on one tiny planet. You have no power to stand against the conquered. One planet? Vasquez allowed a small, knowing smile to play on her lips. Ambassador, I believe you'll find humanity has expanded quite a bit since you started spying on us. She activated her own holographic projector. A map of human-controlled space bloomed in the air. Not one world, but 43. 43 star systems, each bristling with defensive platforms, shipyards, and military bases. The aliens just stared, completely stunned. You should also know, Vasquez added, that as of 6 hours ago, all human military assets were moved to high alert. Our colonies are in lockdown, and we've initiated a new strategy we're calling the Lighthouse Protocol. What is that? Ftharani demanded, her voice sharp. Vasquez ignored the question. I suggest you return to your council and consider our counteroffer. We're happy to talk for as long as it takes, but we will not surrender. Not now. Not ever. She turned and started for the door. Just before she reached it, Ftharani's voice, now cold and menacing, stopped her. You are making a catastrophic mistake, the ambassador hissed. The Concord does not suffer defiance. You are choosing destruction for your people. Vasquez glanced back over her shoulder, her expression more sad than afraid. Maybe, she said quietly, but I would rather face destruction on my feet than live for 1,000 years on my knees. She left without another word, leaving a storm of chaos in her wake. Voices clashed, accusations flew, and for the first time in 12,000 years, the mighty Galactic Concord had absolutely no idea what to do. On her shuttle ride back to the beautiful blue marble of Earth, Elena Vasquez let herself feel, for just 1 second, a wave of crushing fear. What had she just done? What horrors had she unleashed upon her people? But the moment passed, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Whatever was coming, humanity would face it, and they would face it standing tall. The Concord High Council hadn't called an emergency session in over 3,000 years. The last time was for the Vorn Rebellion, when one of the ancient elder species tried to break free from Concord rule. That uprising was crushed in less than 6 months. The Vorn learned their lesson, and no one had dared challenge the Concord since. Until today. The council chamber was a colossal dome that floated in the empty space between 3 ancient stars. It was built back in the Concord's early days, when the founding members still had fresh memories of war. The entire dome was made of a transparent crystal, allowing the starlight to flood in from all directions, a constant reminder that the Concord's power was everywhere. 12 massive seats were arranged around a central platform. These were the Elder Seats, held for the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. The Siluri had a seat. So did the Vorn, the Luminari, the Crystalline Makth, and 8 others whose names were legends when most races were just discovering fire. Today, all 12 seats were occupied. And surrounding them, in tiered galleries that stretched up to the crystal ceiling, sat the representatives from the other 335 member species. They had all come to see how the council would handle the human problem. Ftharani stood in the center of the chamber, her scales a sickly pale color from the stress. In all her centuries of diplomatic service, she had never once failed to bring a new species into the fold. The humans had made her look like a fool, and she could feel the blame from every corner of the vast dome. "The situation is straightforward," she announced, her voice magically amplified to fill the space. "The humans have rejected the standard treaty of integration. They have countered with a proposal based on something they call equal partnership. They have refused all offers of our guidance and have made it clear they will fight any attempt at forced assimilation." A low murmur swept through the assembled aliens. The Makth representative, a creature that resembled a tree made of living diamond, shifted forward. "This is not possible," it said, its voice sounding like shattering glass. "No species in all of our recorded history has ever refused integration. The humans must have misunderstood the terms. We should send another diplomat to explain it to them more simply." "With all due respect," Vitharani replied, "the humans understood everything perfectly. Their leader, a female named Vasquez, grilled me on every single clause. They know precisely what they're turning down." "Then they're insane," the Makth declared. "And an insane species must be viewed as a threat to the stability of the galaxy." "I agree," boomed Korth of the Vorn. His colossal stone body shifted in its seat with a sound like grinding continents. "These humans are dangerous. Their entire history is a testament to violence. They have never stopped fighting, even amongst themselves. If we let them stay independent, it's only a matter of time before they become a threat to all of us." Vitharani wanted to object, but she knew Korth had a point. She had reviewed human history on her journey to Earth. It was a horrifying chronicle of wars, genocides, and endless destruction that had stunned even her. Humans had killed billions of their own kind over arguments about land, ideas, and even something they called religion, which seemed to be about disagreeing over things that couldn't be proven. A species that violent could not be left to wander the galaxy unchecked. But Minister Yael of the Luminary offered a different perspective. "Before we jump to military options," the being of pure light shimmered, "perhaps we should first consider the new information these humans have given us. Ambassador Vitharani, you said they showed you a map?" "Model, it's a map of human star systems." "Correct," Vitharani confirmed, her voice tight. "Somehow, humanity has managed to colonize 43 star systems right under our noses." A wave of shock rippled through the council chamber. 43 systems was a drop in the bucket compared to the millions under the Concord's control, but the fact that they existed at all was a stunning failure. The Concord's surveillance grid was supposed to be flawless, tracking every species capable of interstellar travel. How could they have missed this? "This is an intelligence collapse of the highest order," Vitharani stated flatly. "We believed they were contained to their home system. We were dead wrong. What else are we wrong about?" "It doesn't matter," Korath boomed, swatting the air with a massive hand. 43 systems, or one. The humans are no match for us. We command 800,000 warships. What do they have? A few hundred? Maybe a few thousand? We could end them in a matter of days." "Could we?" a new voice rasped, cutting through the arrogance. Every head in the chamber swiveled to the oldest seat, where Grandmother Teth sat. She was the last of the Cathari. A species so ancient they were legends when the Concord was just an idea. She never spoke in council, but when she did, the galaxy listened. Grandmother Teth was tiny, barely a meter tall, her frail body bundled in ancient cloths that left only her 4 eyes visible. Those eyes were like chips of obsidian that had watched stars being born, and they held memories no other living thing could comprehend. "Could we?" she asked again. "You assume so much, young Korath. You assume humans are just another species to be absorbed. You assume they'll shatter when we apply pressure. You assume they have no surprises for us." "What could they possibly have?" Korath scoffed. "They've barely been traveling the stars for a century. They're infants compared to us." Infants can be full of surprises, Grandmother Teth whispered. I remember the time before the Concord. I remember what real war looked like, when species fought for their very existence. These humans, they remind me of those days. They haven't had thousands of years of enforced peace to make them soft. They are hard and sharp and utterly desperate. She let her ancient gaze drift across the stunned council members. And a desperate creature, she finished, is the most dangerous thing in the universe. The chamber was utterly silent. Even Korath looked momentarily unsure. If Grandmother Teth, who had seen everything, was concerned, maybe they should be too. But the moment of doubt vanished as the Maketh representative spoke, its voice like shifting crystals. With all due respect to the Ancient One, our policy cannot be dictated by fear. The Concord has kept order for 12,000 years by meeting every challenge with overwhelming force. If we let the humans defy us, others will get the same idea. The defiance of one can quickly become the rebellion of many. We have seen this exact pattern before, it concluded. Nods of agreement spread through the room. The lesson from the Vaughn uprising was seared into their history. Show a single moment of weakness, and you invite galactic chaos. Korath rose, his huge frame blotting out the light. I propose we take immediate military action. We send a peacekeeping fleet into their territory, not to attack, but as a show of force. Let them see what they're up against if they refuse. In my experience, a species becomes far more cooperative when they see 800,000 warships parked in their sky. I second the motion, the Maketh chimed. I oppose this, Vethrani said, but her voice was drowned out by a chorus of assent. She watched the vote unfold with a knot of dread in her stomach. She had looked into the eyes of the human leader during the initial contact. She'd seen something there the council was completely missing, something that made her fear they were walking straight into a trap, but her voice was just one among many. The motion passed by a landslide. A fleet of 800,000 warships was to be dispatched to human space at once. The message was unmistakable. Join us, or be erased. Far away, on a planet called Earth, Elena Vasquez was getting ready for this exact outcome. She stood in the heart of a command center deep beneath the Swiss Alps, surrounded by holographic displays of ship movements, intelligence feeds, and live channels from every corner of human territory. Admiral Chen Wei was at her side, along with General Okafor of the Colonial Defense Forces and Dr. Sarah Kim, the brilliant head of special projects. They're on their way, Chen said, tapping a display that showed the Concord fleet converging. 800,000 ships, heavy cruiser class or bigger. They'll be at our doorstep in about 6 days. Vasquez nodded grimly. Faster than we hoped. They must be feeling very sure of themselves. They have every reason to be, Chen answered, his face a mask of concern. 800,000 ships versus our entire fleet of 312. Their technology is generations ahead of ours. On paper, this is a slaughter. Good thing we're not fighting this on paper, then, Vasquez shot back. She turned to Dr. Kim. Doctor, what's the status of the Lighthouse Protocol? Kim brought up a new display, showing a star chart glittering with thousands of tiny glowing dots. Deployment is 100% complete. 32,000 probes are now in position in key systems all across Concord space. Each one contains a full, uncensored archive of everything we've learned about them, especially the parts they've tried to bury. A grim smile touched Vasquez's lips. In the short time since humanity had reached the stars, they hadn't just been building colonies. They had been watching, listening. They had cracked Concord communications, infiltrated their historical databases, and stitched together the real story of the galaxy's self-appointed rulers. And it was a very ugly story. The Concord preached peace and unity, but their empire was built on a foundation of threats and cultural annihilation. Species who joined them were given a comfortable cage, but those who dared to resist were systematically crushed. Their people were scattered, their cultures erased, and their histories were completely rewritten until they were just another footnote in the Concorde's glorious ascent. The galaxy had forgotten how to truly fight, because the Concorde had murdered anyone who remembered. The Lighthouse Protocol was humanity's dead man's switch. If Earth fell, if the last human colony was turned to glass, those 32,000 probes would activate. They would broadcast the unvarnished truth to every species in the galaxy. Every lie, every broken treaty, every genocide the Concorde had committed to maintain its power. It would all be laid bare. It wouldn't save humanity, but it would shatter the Concorde into 1,000,000 pieces. And that, Vasquez had decided long ago, was a far better outcome than surrender. "What about our defense grid?" she asked, turning to General Okafor. The general was a tall, stoic woman with streaks of gray in her hair and a calm that seemed unshakable. She'd run the colonial defense forces for 20 years, handling everything from pirate gangs to rogue asteroids. "All stations are on high alert," she reported. "The Kepler line is active. We've laid autonomous weapons platforms, stealth minefields, and gravity distortion generators across their only viable entry points. Anyone who tries to punch through that is going to bleed." "Will it be enough?" Vasquez asked quietly. Okafor paused. "It will hurt them," she said at last. "Hurt them badly. But 800,000 ships, ma'am, that's a tide of steel. If they're willing to pay the price in blood, they will get through eventually." "Then our job is to make that price higher than they're willing to pay," Vasquez declared. She turned, her voice ringing out across the entire command center, where hundreds of the best minds in human history worked at their stations. She could see the fear in their eyes, but beneath it, she saw a flicker of resolve. "Listen up, everyone," she called out. "In 6 days, the Concorde arrives. They think we're going to roll over. They think we're going to plead for mercy. They think we're going to be just like all the others they've stomped into the dust." She let the silence hang in the air for a beat. "They are wrong." She began to walk through the aisles, meeting the gazes of her people. "We are humanity. We survived ice ages. We survived plagues that wiped out millions. We survived world wars and stared down nuclear annihilation. We even survived our own worst instincts, and that might be the hardest test there is. We did it by never, ever surrendering, by standing up and fighting for what was ours." She came to a stop before the main display, where the Concorde fleet was a terrifying red storm cloud about to break over their tiny cluster of stars. "The Concorde thinks they know us. They've studied our history. They've seen our endless wars. They think our capacity for violence is a sickness that they, in their great wisdom, need to cure. But they don't get it. They don't understand what that history truly means." She turned back to the room, her eyes blazing with a fire that chased the shadows from every corner. "It means we know how to fight. It means we've been practicing for 10,000 years. It means that when our backs are against the wall, with nowhere to run and no hope of surrender, that is when we are at our most dangerous." A current of energy surged through the room. Spines straightened. Fear was being burned away by a defiant heat. "We might not win this battle," Vasquez continued, her voice dropping to a low, intense vow. "We might not even survive. But I make you this one promise. We will make them remember us. 1,000 years from now, when children across the galaxy whisper stories about the day someone finally had the guts to stand up to the Concorde, they will be telling our story, the story of humanity. The people who looked at a godlike power and said, no." She raised a clenched fist. "For Earth! For the colonies! For a future that we choose!" The room exploded. Hundreds of fists shot into the air, a forest of defiance. A roar of voices answered her call. The fear was still there, a cold knot in their stomachs, but it was now wrapped in something far hotter and stronger. The unbreakable will of a people who had chosen to fight, no matter the cost. "That was one heck of a speech," Vasquez said, her voice steady. "It was the truth. Now, let's make them believe it." For the next 6 days, every corner of human space buzzed with grim purpose. Fleets moved to their posts along the Kepler line, a string of star systems marking the edge of their territory. These weren't the shiny, powerful ships from the recruitment posters. Those were tucked away, hidden in nebulae the conquered knew nothing about. No, the ships on the front line were aging veterans, crewed by volunteers who knew they were likely on a one-way trip. And they went anyway. Automated defense platforms, silent since their construction, hummed to life. Minefields armed themselves, waiting patiently in the dark. Gravity generators charged, ready to unleash spatial distortions that could shred starships like paper. And across the scattered worlds of humanity, people held their breath. On Earth, families drew close. Some whispered prayers, others said their quiet goodbyes. Many just couldn't accept that war was coming. The conquered was supposed to be about peace, right? Surely this was all just a bluff. But on the colony worlds, they knew better. Life on the frontier taught you to be practical. They double-checked their shelter assignments, ran diagnostics on their emergency gear, and braced for the storm. In the massive shipyards of Kepler 442b, humanity's biggest colony, welders worked around the clock, putting the finishing touches on a new breed of warship. These vessels were nothing like the conquered had ever encountered. They were designed with a single, brutal purpose: to hunt and kill other ships. Every system, every angle of the hull, every piece of hardware was optimized for raw combat. They were ugly, terrifying things. They were humanity's answer. On the 6th day, the conquered fleet arrived. 800 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, a shimmering wall of doom at the edge of human space. They were terrifyingly beautiful, each one a masterpiece of engineering refined over thousands of years. Their hulls shone with exotic metals, and their weapon ports pulsed with barely restrained energy. These were the most advanced military ships in the galaxy, piloted by species who had enjoyed peace for so long, they'd forgotten what a real fight felt like. The fleet was commanded by High Admiral Thesson of the Vaughn, the nephew of Korath himself. He was a young gun by his people's standards, only 800 years old, and chomping at the bit to make a name for himself. This was supposed to be a cakewalk. Show up, flex their overwhelming power, and the humans would fold. He opened a channel to the human fleet. "People of Earth," his voice boomed across the void. "I am High Admiral Thesson of the Galactic Conquered Peacekeeping Fleet. You have one standard day to accept the Integration Treaty and power down your military. Refuse, and we will be forced to restore order. The choice is yours." He cut the transmission and leaned back, expecting the usual terrified response. This is how it always worked. A show of strength, a little negotiation, and then a swift surrender. The humans might be stubborn, but they weren't idiots. Nobody stares down the barrels of 800 warships and decides to pick a fight. But the reply didn't come from Earth. It came from a tiny, lonely station out on the Kepler line. The signal was blasted on all frequencies, in every known language, to every single ship on both sides. It was Secretary General Vasquez. "High Admiral Thesson," she said, her voice impossibly calm. "Thank you for the offer. We decline." Thesson's stone-like face actually cracked in surprise. "And another thing," Vasquez went on, "we have a message for you, for your entire fleet, and for every species in the galaxy watching this. We didn't ask for this fight. We never bothered the conquered. We never threatened anyone. All we wanted was to live our lives, our way, out here among the stars. You came to us. You demanded we kneel, and you threatened to wipe us out if we didn't." She leaned in, her eyes like burning coals in the camera. "Well, we don't kneel. And now you get to find out what happens when you corner humanity. She sat up straight, her voice ringing with defiance. "We will defend our homes. We will fight with every last breath. And if we are to fall, we will not go quietly into the night. Watch this, and remember. This is humanity's answer to bullies." The transmission cut out. Thesson just stared at the blank screen. Around him, his bridge officers looked at each other, confused. This wasn't in the script. New species always backed down. It was the natural way of things. But these humans, they weren't natural. They never had been. As Thesson gave the command to advance, he felt a strange, cold knot in his stomach. It was an emotion his people hadn't felt for millennia. It was fear. High Admiral Thesson gave the order, and 800 warships from the Galactic Concord surged forward into human territory. This was supposed to be a simple police action. Human intelligence suggested they had, at most, a few hundred primitive ships, barely a century old. The Concord fleet, on the other hand, had weapons that could crack planets, shields that could laugh off a supernova, and technology perfected over 12,000 years of peace. The outcome was a foregone conclusion to everyone but the humans. The first shock came at the edge of the Kepler line. Thesson's forward scouts, nimble ships built for recon, jumped into the system the humans called Kepler 138. It was a boring red dwarf with a few barren, rocky planets, the perfect place for a token first line of defense. The scouts expected to see a few defense platforms, maybe a handful of old ships left behind for a show. Instead, they found nothing. Just empty space and silent worlds. Not a single human ship on their sensors. "They've run," Thesson's tactical officer said, breathing a sigh of relief. "See? The humans are smarter than we gave them credit for. They know they can't win." But Thesson wasn't so sure. This felt wrong. After that fiery speech, why would they just turn tail and run? "Proceed with the advance," he ordered, "but be cautious." The main fleet poured into Kepler 138, sliding into their standard, flawless geometric formations, a breathtaking display of power that had crushed the spirit of countless civilizations. And that's when the universe itself seemed to attack them. It began as tiny ripples in space-time, distortions so small they were almost dismissed as sensor ghosts. The Concord navigators were the first to notice, flagging them as oddities. But before they could even file a report, the ripples erupted. Gravity generators, hidden deep inside asteroids and buried on dead moons, all switched on at once. Space itself twisted and tore, creating invisible walls of force that slammed into the Concord's perfect formation. Ships flying in perfect sync were suddenly yanked in opposite directions. Hulls engineered to withstand anything groaned and then screamed as they were ripped apart by gravitational forces they were never designed to encounter. 12 ships were annihilated in the first 30 seconds. Not by a missile, not by a laser, but by the very fabric of space being turned into a weapon. "Evasive maneuvers!" Thesson bellowed. "Break formation! Get clear of those traps!" The fleet scrambled, discipline shattering as each captain fought to escape the invisible meat grinder. And in that chaos, the second surprise sprang. From the dark gaps between asteroids, from the shadows of tiny moons, from places their advanced sensors had sworn were empty, human ships materialized. They were tiny next to the majestic Concord vessels, ugly, blocky things that looked less like starships and more like engines with guns bolted on. But they were unbelievably fast. The humans didn't bother with the graceful, long-range combat the Concord had perfected. Instead, they attacked like a pack of rabid animals. Swarms of smaller ships would descend on a single Concord warship, overwhelming it with sheer numbers before vanishing to strike another target. And their weapons were horrifyingly primitive. They didn't fire elegant beams of energy. They fired solid chunks of metal at unimaginable speeds. The Concord's shields, designed to deflect energy, sizzled and flickered against the raw, kinetic impact. Some of those projectiles punched straight through shields and armor that had never once been breached. "What is this?" Thesson demanded, his tactical display lighting up with a cascade of damage alerts. "What kind of weapons are those?" His science officer was staring at his own readings, his expression turning to one of pure dread. "Sir, they're kinetic impactors," he stammered. They're throwing rocks at us. Our shields aren't calibrated for this. They're built for energy." Thesson stared at the screen, his mind struggling to comprehend. The Conquered had been using energy weapons for 10,000 years. Nobody used kinetic weapons anymore. They were crude, inefficient, ancient. But against shields designed only to stop energy, they were utterly devastating. The battle raged for hours. The Conquered fleet still had the advantage in numbers and raw power, and they started to adapt. They recalibrated their shields and changed their tactics, slowly pushing back the human swarms. But every inch they gained was paid for in blood and wreckage. For every one human ship they managed to destroy, 2 or 3 of their own were left crippled and bleeding into the void. The humans fought with a savagery that stunned the Conquered crews. They never retreated, they never surrendered, even when their ships were breaking apart around them. They fought until their cannons were silent and their engines were burning. And then, in a final act of horrifying defiance, they would turn their dying ships into missiles, ramming them straight into the nearest Conquered vessel. And they weren't alone. Suddenly, the entire system came alive with automated weapons, spitting out swarms of missiles that locked onto Conquered ships with terrifying accuracy. Invisible stealth mines drifted through the chaos, detonating the moment an enemy vessel strayed too close. The whole star system had been turned into a giant mousetrap, and the Conquered fleet had just walked right into it. After 6 grueling hours of fighting, Tan gave the order to retreat. The numbers were grim. The Conquered had arrived at Kepler 138 with 800 ships. They limped away with only 573. Over 200 vessels were either vaporized or too mangled to fight. Tens of thousands were gone. It was the single worst military disaster in the Conquered's entire history. And the humans? They had only lost 64 ships. The news hit the Conquered High Council long before the official report from Thesson even arrived. Rumors, broken transmissions, and terrified messages from survivors traveled faster than light. By the time the council finally gathered, the whole galaxy knew something unthinkable had happened. Vthrani sat in her chair, just watching the meltdown. The chamber was pure chaos. Races that had been smug and confident just a few days ago were now screaming at each other, pointing fingers and demanding answers. How could this have happened? Who was to blame? What did this mean for the Conquered itself? Korth was already on his feet, his usually stone-like face cracked with fury. "This is an outrage!" he roared. "The humans attacked us! They've killed our people! This is an act of war!" "We attacked them, Minister," Yell pointed out, its body light flickering with anxiety. "Our fleet went into their territory. We fired first." "On the orders of this council," Koret thundered back. "The humans were supposed to roll over. They were supposed to be terrified." He trailed off, struggling to find the words for what had actually happened. "They fought back," Grandmother Teeth said, her voice a quiet whisper that cut through the noise, silencing the entire chamber. "They did precisely what they told us they would do. We have no right to be surprised." "How were we supposed to know they could pull this off?" the Maketh representative shot back. "Our spies said they had primitive tech, a tiny fleet, and 0 real combat experience. Instead, we stumble into hidden colonies, advanced weapons, and defensive systems we never even knew existed. How could we have missed all of this?" Vthrani slowly rose to her feet. She had been dreading this moment, but she knew it was unavoidable. "We missed it," she said, her voice thick with shame, "because we stopped paying attention. We stopped taking anyone else seriously. We just assumed that because we've been on top for 12,000 years, we'd always be on top. We assumed that because no one ever challenged us. No one ever could. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of beings she had known for centuries. The humans didn't make those assumptions. They looked at us and saw a threat. They prepared for that threat in secret while we watched them with the lazy confidence of an old lion that has forgotten how to hunt. We thought they were children playing with toys. We were wrong. So what are you suggesting? Korath demanded. That we just surrender? Let these, humans dictate terms to the mighty Concord? I am suggesting, Vithrani said very carefully, that we consider the possibility that we have made a terrible mistake, and that if we keep going down this road, we might make things 1,000 times worse. We cannot show weakness, the Makth representative yelled. If we back down now, every single species in the galaxy will see it. They'll know the Conquered can be beaten. They'll know that fighting back is an option. The order we've kept for 12 millennia will fall apart. Perhaps, Grandmother Teeth said, that order was never as strong as we thought. All eyes snapped back to her. The ancient creature seemed smaller than ever, bundled in her dark robes. But her 4 eyes glowed with a wisdom that was older than most of the civilizations in that room. Do you want to know why the humans were able to do this? She asked. It's not because they're stronger, or smarter, or more advanced than we are. It's because they have something we lost a long, long time ago. They have will, the sheer determination to fight for what they believe in, even when it looks hopeless. We gave that up when we created the Concord. She slowly stood up, her tiny frame straightening with purpose. 12,000 years ago, we were all warriors. We fought wars that set the galaxy on fire. Wars that shattered worlds and claimed trillions of lives. It was horrifying. So we built the Concord to stop the fighting, to make sure those horrors never happened again. And in the process, we forgot what it means to be a warrior. She looked directly at Korath, then at the Makth, and at every other representative who had voted to go to war. The humans haven't forgotten. They are what we used to be, and now we have a choice. Do we continue this war, pouring lives and resources into crushing a people that will simply never give up? Or do we finally admit that we've run into something we just don't know how to beat? The chamber exploded into arguments all over again. Accusations and denials flew through the air like stray bullets. But Vithrani saw something she had never, ever seen before in a Concord Council meeting. She saw fear. It was in the nervous glances they shot each other. It was in the slight hesitation before they spoke. It was in the way some of them couldn't even meet their neighbor's gaze. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Conquered was afraid. And that fear was about to change everything. Back on Earth, Secretary General Vasquez watched the reports from Kepler 138 with a grim sense of satisfaction. They had won the first battle, but she knew this was far from over. Casualties? She asked, turning to Admiral Chen. 64 ships lost, he reported. Roughly 1,800 crew members killed. Another 32 ships are damaged and undergoing repairs. Vasquez closed her eyes for a second. 1,800 names. 1,800 families who were about to get the worst news of their lives. She had known this was a possibility, had mentally prepared for it, but the reality of it still felt like a physical weight on her shoulders. And the Conquered? She asked. At least 200 of their ships are either destroyed or completely disabled. We estimate their casualties are in the tens of thousands, maybe even higher. They've pulled back to the edge of the system to regroup. They'll be back, General Okoye said. She had dark circles under her eyes from not sleeping for days, but her voice was rock solid. This was just a test. The Conquered has hundreds of thousands of ships. They can take losses that would wipe us out. I know, Vasquez said. That's why this can't just be a military victory. We need to make it stand for something. She turned to Dr. Kim. The lighthouse probes. Are they still safe? All 32,000 probes are active and watching, Kim confirmed. We haven't started the broadcast yet, but we're ready to flip the switch at any time. The Concord knows they're out there. They've been frantically trying to find them, but we built them to be practically invisible. Good. Let them sweat, wondering what we might show the galaxy, Vasquez said, pulling up a new screen showing communication intercepts from all over. What are we hearing from the other species? Kim sifted through the data. A lot more chatter. A whole lot. Species that have been silent for centuries are suddenly talking to one another again. Some of it is encrypted, but the messages we can read show shock, disbelief, and something else. What is it? Hope, Kim said softly. Some of them are starting to feel hope again. Vasquez nodded slowly. This was the gamble she had been counting on. The Concord had stayed in power for so long, not just with ships, but by making everyone believe that resistance was futile. By fighting back, by actually winning a battle, humanity had shattered that illusion. We need to reach out to them, she said carefully. Secretly. Find the species who still remember what it was like to be free. Find the ones who might be willing to join us. That's a huge risk, Chen warned. If the Concord finds out we're trying to build an alliance against them, they'll drop the hammer immediately. No more so-called peacekeeping fleets. They'll mobilize their entire military. They're going to do that anyway, Vasquez countered. We've wounded their pride. They can't let that go unanswered. The only question is, do we face them alone, or do we face them with friends? She gazed out the command center window, up at the stars that were now both humanity's home and its battlefield. The Concord has spent 12,000 years teaching the galaxy to be obedient, she said. They've forgotten that obedience is a lesson that can be unlearned. Every single species out there was free once. They can be free again. All they need is for someone to remind them it's possible. She turned back to her team. So let's remind them. In the weeks that followed, humanity launched its boldest mission yet. Using their hidden network of probes and secret communication channels built over decades, human diplomats started making contact with species all across the galaxy. They began with the easy ones, races that had been conquered recently, whose people still had living memories of life before the Concord. They found deep resentment, bitterness, and a powerful hunger for the freedom that had been stolen. Then they moved on to the older members, species that had been part of the Concord for centuries, even millennia. That was tougher work. Many had forgotten what independence even felt like. But even among those ancient peoples, there were some who remembered. Around the galaxy, there were those who remembered the old ways, historians guarding forbidden stories, rebels who refused to let their dreams die, and leaders who were sick of taking orders from alien masters. And no matter where they went, the humans were met with the same doubtful question. Can you actually win? Vasquez's answer never changed. I don't know if we can win, she'd say, her voice steady. But I know we will fight. We know the Concord isn't as invincible as it pretends to be. And we know that if enough of us stand together, if enough people remember who they used to be, even the Concord can't stop us. It wasn't a guarantee of victory, but it was something just as powerful. It was hope. Meanwhile, the Concord was plotting its revenge for the disaster at Kepler 138. The High Council argued for weeks, but in the end, their wounded pride and their fear got the better of them. They weren't about to negotiate with the humans. They would accept nothing less than total surrender. The humans had made them look like fools, and that kind of insult had to be answered with overwhelming force. A new fleet was being put together, far bigger than the first. This time, it was 2,000 warships, with ground troops ready for a full-scale occupation. The mission wasn't just to beat humanity, it was to wipe them out so completely that no one would ever even think about defying the Concord again. They were going to make an example out of Earth. But as this massive fleet gathered, something was happening that the Concord never saw coming. Whispers were spreading across the stars, species were talking, people were starting to remember. On 17 different worlds scattered across the galaxy, resistance movements that had been silent for centuries, were slowly waking up. Leaders who had obediently followed conquered law for generations started asking dangerous questions. Entire populations that had been quiet and peaceful were getting restless. The galaxy was shifting, and right at the heart of it all was a little species from a totally unremarkable planet, a species that had looked the greatest power in the universe right in the eye and said, "No." The humans had no clue if they'd survive the storm that was coming. But they'd already achieved something nobody else had managed in 12,000 years. They had made the Concord afraid. And fear, once it takes root, has a habit of growing. The Second Concord Fleet was the biggest military force anyone had seen in over 3,000 years. 2,000 warships from 28 different species, all under the command of Grand Admiral Vorath, the most celebrated military mind in living memory. He'd crushed rebellions on 17 worlds, forced the surrender of 3 entire spacefaring civilizations, and had served the Concord for over 2,000 years. He was old, he was brilliant, and he was absolutely sure he was going to win. The fleet came together at Concord Station Prime, a colossal station hanging in the empty space between 3 star systems. Ships warped in from every corner of the galaxy, the shimmering crystal ships of the Makath, the organic vessels of the Veldari, the massive fortress ships of the Vaughn, and dozens more. Altogether, they were the absolute might of galactic civilization. Vorath stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Peace, watching his armada assemble. 2,000 ships, 100 million crew members, and enough firepower to turn entire planets to glass. And they were going up against a species that had only been flying in space for 60 years. "This will be over in a flash," his aide commented. He was a young Sali named Thasari, assigned to Vorath after the mess at Kepler 138. "The humans can't possibly stand against a force like this." Vorath didn't answer right away. He was busy studying the reports from the first battle, picking apart every single detail of the human strategy. What he found there bothered him. "They fought well," he said at last. "Better than any species I've seen in centuries. It's like they prepared specifically for our weapons, our shields, our formations. They didn't just fight back, they adapted." "They got lucky," Thasari insisted. "Admiral Thesson underestimated them. You won't make that same mistake." "No," Vorath agreed, his voice low. "I will not." He turned from the viewport and moved to the tactical display. The map showed human territory, 43 known systems with Earth right in the middle. Their intel suggested there might be other hidden colonies, but nobody knew where. "We will not be repeating his approach," Vorath announced. "No single attack, no assuming it will be easy. We will push forward on multiple fronts at the same time, crushing their defenses with sheer numbers. They can't be everywhere at once." He started tapping targets on the display. "Fleet Group 1 will hit the Kepler colonies. Fleet Group 2 will push toward their main industrial worlds. Fleet Group 3 will head straight for Earth. Each group is powerful enough to handle anything they run into, but nimble enough to maneuver. We will force the humans to split their navy, and then we will destroy them one piece at a time." It was a solid plan against any normal opponent. It should have been a guaranteed win, but the humans were not normal. When Secretary General Vasquez saw the intelligence report on the Second Fleet, she felt her stomach drop. 2,000 ships. She knew it was coming, but seeing the number in black and white was still a shock. "We can't stop that," Admiral Chen said, his voice barely a whisper. They were alone in her office, the door sealed and every recording device shut off. Some talks were too sensitive for the official record. "Even if we pull back every ship from every colony, even if we call up every last reserve, we'd still be outnumbered 4-1, and their ships are still better than ours." "I know," Vasquez replied. "That's why we're not going to try to stop them." Chen just stared at her. "What are you talking about? We have to defend ourselves." We have to survive, Vasquez cut in. That is our only real goal, survival. As long as humanity is still out there, we have a chance. As long as a single human colony remains free, the conquered hasn't truly won. She brought up a map of human-controlled space. We're going to evacuate the outer colonies. We'll move everyone we can to our hidden systems, the ones the conquered knows nothing about. We'll leave behind skeleton crews to make it look like everything is normal. But our real strength will be hiding. You're talking about abandoning entire worlds. Billions of our people. I'm talking about saving them, she countered. The conquered doesn't just want to destroy us. They want to absorb us. If our people are on worlds they can't find, they can't be absorbed. Vasquez looked him straight in the eye. This is going to be brutal, Admiral. We are going to lose battles. We're going to lose ships. We might even lose Earth. But as long as humanity survives somewhere, anywhere, we have not lost this war. Chen was quiet for a long time. The people won't like it, he finally said. Running away. It's the exact opposite of everything we've been telling them. Then we'll tell them the truth, Vasquez said. We'll tell them this is a strategic retreat, not a surrender. We'll tell them we're fighting a new kind of war, a war for survival, not for territory. And we'll promise them that when the time is right, we will take back every single thing we've lost. She stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the star-filled sky. There's something else. Something I haven't told the full council yet. What is it? Our diplomatic efforts. They've been more successful than we ever dared to hope. 17 species have contacted us secretly. 12 of them have already agreed to give us covert aid, intelligence, supplies, a safe place for our refugees. And 3 of them, she paused, picking her words with care. 3 of them are seriously considering open rebellion. Chen's eyes went wide. Against the conquered? Against the conquered, she confirmed. Not right away. Not while the war is still up in the air. But if we can just hold on long enough, if we can prove that resisting them is possible, they are ready to stand with us. For the first time since he saw that awful intelligence report, Admiral Chen felt a genuine flicker of hope. We're not fighting alone, he breathed. No, Vasquez agreed. We're not. We just have to survive long enough for our allies to matter. The second Concord fleet attacked 3 weeks later. Just as Vorath had planned, they struck from multiple directions at once. Fleet Group 1 surged into the Kepler systems. Fleet Group 2 hammered the human industrial centers. And Fleet Group 3 raced toward Earth. This time, the humans didn't try to form a defensive line. Their ships launched quick hit-and-run attacks, harassing the conquered fleet before vanishing back into deep space. Defense platforms fired to slow the enemy down, but they never tried to stop them completely. At first, Vorath was satisfied. The humans were finally learning their place. They were running, just as they should have from the start. But as his fleets pushed deeper into their territory, he started to notice something odd. The colonies they were capturing were empty. Not just abandoned in a hurry, with personal belongings scattered in the streets. They were empty as if they'd been vacant for years. The buildings were perfectly intact, but hollow. Factories were still running on automated systems, but there were no workers. Farms were growing crops that no one was there to harvest. Billions of people had just disappeared into thin air. Where did they all go? Thesari asked, standing next to Vorath on a deserted street on Kepler 442b. This planet had been humanity's biggest colony, home to over 2 billion people. Now, it was a ghost world. I don't know, Vorath admitted, his voice tight with frustration. Our intelligence showed normal population levels just days before we arrived. They couldn't have moved that many people that fast. It's impossible. Unless they had somewhere to go that we don't know about. Vorath's scales darkened with rage. The humans were hiding from him, scurrying away to secret hideouts where his mighty fleet couldn't reach them. This wasn't the honorable victory he had planned for. This was something else entirely. "Find them," he snarled. "I want every scout ship we have sweeping the surrounding systems. The humans have hidden their colonies. We need to find them and put an end to this." But finding those secret colonies was easier said than done. Humanity had been getting ready for this moment for decades, picking out new homes on worlds that were totally ordinary, a nightmare to scan, and way off the beaten path of any trade routes. The conquered scouts spent weeks searching and came up with absolutely nothing. All the while, human guerrilla fighters kept up their hit-and-run attacks. They'd hit supply convoys, picking off transport ships one by one before just melting back into the blackness of space. They'd set traps for patrol ships, blowing them to bits, and vanishing before backup could even think about showing up. They even planted bombs in facilities the conquered had taken over, setting them to go off right when the conquered troops were moving in. This was not the kind of war the conquered was built to fight. Their entire strategy was based on massive, decisive battles, overwhelming power, and a quick, clean victory. The humans weren't giving them any of that. And as Fleet Group 3 pushed toward Earth, something happened that flipped the entire board. When the conquered forces got to the edge of Earth's solar system, they were braced for a huge fight. What they found instead was an invitation. A single, unarmed human ship was just sitting there in Neptune's orbit, broadcasting on every channel. The pilot introduced herself as Commander Sarah Chen, the daughter of Admiral Chen. She said she had a message from Secretary General Vasquez. Humanity was requesting a meeting, one representative from each side, at a neutral location. "We want to talk about the terms," she said. Vorath smelled a trap, but the High Council was getting desperate. After weeks of chasing ghosts, the chance to actually talk felt like a gift from the heavens. They agreed to the meeting. It was set to take place on humanity's diplomatic station, the same one Vasquez had broadcast from after the Battle of Kepler 138. Vorath decided to go himself, bringing along an honor guard of 30 of his best warriors. The humans greeted them politely and led them to a conference room with a breathtaking view of the stars. Vasquez was there waiting. She looked exhausted. The war had taken its toll, carving new lines on her face and weaving gray into her hair. But her eyes were as sharp as ever, and her voice was steady and strong. "Grand Admiral," she said, standing up to meet him. "Thank you for coming." "I came to accept your surrender," Vorath shot back, wasting no time. "Your position is hopeless. Your colonies are gone. Your fleet is scattered and hiding. Earth is sitting right in front of us, completely defenseless. End this ridiculous game now, and the conquered might just show you some mercy." Vasquez just smiled, but there was no happiness in it. "I didn't invite you here to surrender," she told him. "I invited you here to give you a chance to." Vorath's honor guard immediately tensed up. A few of them even reached for their weapons, but Vasquez didn't make a single move that looked like a threat. "Let me walk you through what's about to happen," she went on. "In about 1 hour, 3 things are going to happen all at once. First, our hidden fleets are going to pop out of their hiding spots and launch a massive, coordinated strike on your supply lines. You're going to lose half of your entire logistics chain before you even realize you're under attack." Vorath actually laughed. "You really expect me to believe that?" But Vasquez kept going as if he hadn't said a word. "Second, the species of the Cathari Reach are going to announce they're leaving the Concord. They'll be joined by the Veldari Consortium and the Outer Systems Alliance. That's 37 species, representing over 400 star systems, all declaring their independence on the same day." Vorath wasn't laughing anymore. The Cathari Reach was one of the founding members of the Conquered. If they left... "Third," Vasquez said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "we activate the Lighthouse Protocol." "The probes," Vorath breathed, the color draining from his face. "The truth you've collected, The truth the Concord has buried for 12,000 years. Every single species in the galaxy is about to find out what really happened to those who fought against integration. Every species will see the proof of the cultural purges, the forced relocations, and the quiet genocides that the Concord has always pretended never took place. The entire lie your empire is built on will be torn down. She leaned in, her gaze locking onto his. Grand Admiral, I'm not asking you to surrender because we've won on the battlefield. Truthfully, you could probably still wipe us out if you were willing to stomach the cost. I'm asking you to surrender because your empire is already dead. It's falling apart as we speak. The people you've ruled for thousands of years are finally waking up. They're remembering what it feels like to be free, and nothing you can do to us is going to stop that. Vorath just stood there in absolute silence for what felt like an eternity. His mind was scrambling, searching for an escape, any way to salvage this disaster. But every path he saw led to ruin. If he attacked Earth now, the rebellion would ignite like a wildfire. If he pulled back, he'd look weak and pathetic. If he ignored her threat, the Lighthouse broadcast would completely shatter the Concord's authority forever. The humans hadn't just been fighting a war of ships and soldiers. They had been fighting a political war, and they had already won. What do you want? He finally choked out. The same thing we've always wanted, Vasquez said calmly. Freedom, not just for us but for every species that wants it. A new galactic order, one built on liberty instead of domination. You can either be a part of it, or you can be washed away by the tide. That is the only choice you have left. Vorath stared at her for a long, long time. He was an old warrior who had seen it all. He'd seen entire civilizations rise and crumble, and he had genuinely believed that the Concord was different, that it would last forever. But now, he saw the truth. Nothing lasts forever, especially not empires. I need to speak with the High Council, he stammered. Of course, Vasquez replied. You have 1 hour. That hour came and went, and when the deadline hit, the galaxy was changed forever. The Lighthouse Protocol went live. 32,000 probes spread across thousands of light years all started broadcasting at the exact same time. Every species with a receiver heard the truth. They learned about the wars of extermination, the forced assimilations, the cultures that were wiped from existence, the histories that were rewritten, and the peoples who had been integrated until they were nothing but a memory. At that exact moment, the rebellion kicked off. The Cathari Reach, the Veldari Consortium, and the Outer Systems Alliance all declared their independence, just like Vasquez said they would. But they weren't the only ones. That broadcast woke up something that had been dormant for ages. Within hours, 14 more groups announced they were leaving the Concord, and then the human fleets came out of hiding. They hammered the Concord's supply lines, just as Vasquez had promised. They didn't even try to take on the Second Fleet directly. They didn't have to. With no fuel, no ammo, no reinforcements, and with the entire galaxy rising up against them, the Second Fleet was completely stranded. Vorath took the news without saying a word. His officers were all looking at him, waiting for orders, but he had none to give them. The war was over, even if the fighting would drag on for a while. He opened a private channel to Vasquez. You planned this. From the very beginning, he said, his voice flat. All of it. Refusing to join, the first battle, pretending to retreat. You were never trying to beat us in a fight. You were trying to break us politically. Yes, Vasquez confirmed. But why? Why go through all this? The death, the destruction, the risk. You could have just sent out the broadcast from the start. Vasquez was quiet for a second. Because just knowing something isn't enough, she said at last. People can know the truth and still do nothing. They needed to believe that things could actually change. They needed to see someone stand up to the Concord and live to tell the tale. They needed hope. She paused. We gave them hope. The rest they did for themselves. Vorath looked at his tactical map, at the flashing icons showing rebel fleets, systems breaking away, and supply lines completely shattered. The Conquered was cracking apart right before his eyes. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we rebuild," Vasquez said. "Not another empire, something better, something that allows every species to find their own way. And if some of them choose to fight, if some try to bring back the Conquered with violence, well, then we'll fight them too. That's the cost of freedom. You always have to be ready to defend it. But at least this time, the choice will be ours." Vorath nodded slowly. He got it. He'd been a soldier for 2,000 years. He knew that some things were worth fighting for. He just wished, for the first time, that he'd been fighting on the right side all along. "Grand Admiral?" Vasquez's voice came through the comm. "Would you like to help us build something new?" Vorath thought about it. His entire life had been given to the Conquered. He'd believed in its purpose, its promise of peace through unity. But that unity had been a lie, and the peace was built on top of graves. "Yes," he said, a sense of clarity washing over him. "I think I would." It wasn't a surrender. It was something so much bigger than that. It was a beginning. A year had passed since the Lighthouse broadcast turned the galaxy on its head. It had been a year of pure chaos, of terrible violence, but also of incredible hope. The Conquered didn't go down without a fight. The hardliners among the older species refused to let go, launching brutal campaigns that cost millions of lives. Some of the newly freed species immediately started fighting each other, with ancient grudges bubbling to the surface after thousands of years of forced peace. Pirates and warlords popped up everywhere to fill the power vacuum, preying on anyone they saw as weak. But through all that fire and blood, something new was being forged. Secretary General Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of Unity Station, humanity's biggest and newest diplomatic hub. It was parked in neutral territory at a point that was perfectly in between a dozen of the major galactic powers. Through the massive transparent walls, she could see the ships of 100 different species, all gathered for what was arguably the most important meeting in the history of the galaxy. Today they were going to sign the Compact of Free Peoples. It wasn't a perfect agreement. It had taken months of brutal negotiations to hammer out something that nobody was completely thrilled with. It was full of compromises on trade, on borders, and on how to deal with the species that still wanted to be part of the Conquered's remnants. Some of the trickiest issues were left intentionally vague, to be figured out later once everyone had calmed down a bit. But it was a start, a real one. "Nervous?" Admiral Chen asked, walking up to stand beside her. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the last year. His hair was completely gray now, and his face was etched with the heavy weight of command. But he was still here, still fighting. They were all terrified. Vasquez leaned over to James and whispered, "Getting them to sign is the easy part. Making it all work? That's the real challenge. But hey, we've done harder things, right?" She glanced at him, a desperate hope in her eyes. "We started a war, James. We took on a 12,000-year-old empire. We have no earthly idea what we just unleashed." James Chen looked out at the massive gathering of species and replied softly, "We unleashed freedom. Whatever happens next, at least they'll get to choose it for themselves." Vasquez gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was the only comfort she could find. The future was a terrifying blank slate. Dangerous, difficult, for sure. But it would be a future they chose, not one forced on them by masters who thought they knew best. And that had to be worth something. The ceremony kicked off an hour later. The Grand Hall of Unity Station was packed with delegates from over 200 different species, the biggest diplomatic meeting in the history of the galaxy. Some of them had traveled for months just to be here. Others appeared as shimmering holograms, their images sent faster than light, their presence just as real. Vasquez recognized so many faces she'd come to know over the last year of chaos and hope. There was Grand Admiral Vorith, once their fiercest enemy, now one of the strongest supporters of this new galactic order. Minister Yell of the Luminari, who had been secretly chipping away at the old empire for centuries. Delegates from the Cathari Reach, the Veldari Consortium, and dozens of other groups who had broken away during the Great Rebellion. And tucked away in the back of the hall, looking small and ancient, sat Grandmother Teeth. She hadn't said a word since the uprising began. The rumor was that she was dying, her ancient body finally giving out after more millennia than anyone could count. Others whispered she was just watching, waiting to see what would grow from the seeds of chaos they had planted. Vasquez walked to the podium, and a hush fell over the crowd. 1 year ago, she began, her voice instantly translated for every being in the room. Humanity made a choice. We were offered a golden cage, a generous deal that was really a trap. We chose to fight instead of kneel. We chose to believe that freedom was worth any price. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the diverse assembly. A lot of you thought we were insane. Some of you probably still do. We were just one species going up against an empire that had stood for 12,000 years. We had no business winning. We should have expected nothing but total annihilation. A small smile touched her lips. But we weren't really alone, were we? We may have been the spark, but you were the fuel. Every species in this room has its own story of being pushed down, your own memories of what the conquered took from you. We didn't start the fire. We just proved it was possible to light the match. She pointed to the massive document displayed behind her, its text glowing softly. The Compact of Free Peoples is not a new empire. It's not a replacement for the conquered. It's something brand new, something that has never been tried on this scale before. She started to read from its opening lines. We, the sovereign peoples of the galaxy, recognizing the inherent dignity and equal rights of all intelligent beings, reject the idea that peace requires one group to rule another. We believe that a true civilization is built on cooperation, not control, on trust, not fear, on the voices of the free, not the silence of the conquered. She looked up. Under this compact, every species who signs keeps their full independence. Nobody will tell you how many kids you can have, or what you can build, or what you can believe. No more advisors in your councils or oversight committees in your industries. You will govern yourselves, just like you should have been doing all along. In return, you only have to agree to one thing, that you will give that same respect to everyone else. You will not conquer. You will not enslave. You will not wipe out the cultures of those weaker than you, the way it was done to so many of us. Freedom isn't really freedom if it's only for the powerful. She stepped back. Some will call this naive. They'll say that peace needs a strong hand, that freedom just leads to chaos, that only an empire can keep order across the stars. And you know what? Maybe they're right. Maybe this whole experiment will blow up in our faces. Maybe 1,000 years from now, historians will look back at this day and laugh at our foolishness. Her voice grew firm. But I would rather fail while reaching for something great than succeed at building something shameful. The Concord gave us order, but it was the order of a prison yard, the order of people who were never allowed to grow or change or become who they were meant to be. We paid for their peace with our souls. And I say, the price was too damn high. She looked each delegate in the eye. Today we try something new. Today we put our trust in each other, not blindly, but as equals who have chosen to walk the same path. Will we mess up? Absolutely. Will we fall? Probably. But at least we'll be walking on our own 2 feet, toward a future we chose together. She raised her hand. For the United Nations of Earth and all human territories, I sign the Compact of Free Peoples. She pressed her palm to the display, and her signature bloomed in light. Then, one by one, the other representatives stepped forward. Some signed with proud, bold strokes. Others moved with hesitation, still not completely sure about the leap of faith they were taking. A few even cried, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the moment. When Admiral Vorith approached, a nervous murmur went through the hall. Many still didn't trust him. This was a man who had spent 2,000 years enforcing the Concord's iron will. His name was tied to some of the darkest chapters of the old regime, but he signed. "I spent my life serving what I thought was peace," he said, his voice gravelly. "I was wrong. This is peace. This, right here. People choosing to live together instead of being forced to." He looked right at Vasquez. "I don't know if I can ever make up for the things I've done, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying." The signing went on for hours. When it was all over, 214 species had added their names. It wasn't everyone, not by a long shot. The die-hard Concord loyalists hadn't even shown up. Several other systems decided to wait and see how things played out, and some governments were just too unstable to even be invited. But it was a start. It was more than enough. As the final delegate signed, Vasquez felt a presence next to her. She turned and saw Grandmother Teeth, the ancient Cathari, looking up at her with 4 timeless eyes. "You did well, little one," the old being rasped, her voice a faint whisper that somehow echoed through the hall. "Did I?" Vasquez asked, her own voice cracking. "I started a war. Millions died. Billions, maybe, before this is all over." "Millions have always died," Grandmother Teeth replied. "The real question is what their deaths bought. If they meant something," she gestured to the hall, where delegates were now talking, laughing, and starting the hard work of building a new galaxy. "This is what they bought. A chance. That is more than most deaths ever achieve." She reached out and touched Vasquez's hand. Her skin felt like ancient paper, cold and dry, but her grip was shockingly strong. "I have lived a very, very long time," she said. "I watched the Concord rise. I watched it turn ugly. For centuries I waited for someone to stand up to it. No one ever did. Until you. I was just in the right place at the right time," Vasquez mumbled. "Perhaps, or perhaps you were exactly who the galaxy needed, right when it needed you. Either way, you have my thanks." A strange smile crossed her ancient face. "And now, I believe I can finally rest." She turned and shuffled back into the crowd, vanishing. Vasquez never saw her again. 3 weeks later, news arrived that Grandmother Teeth had passed away peacefully on her homeworld. She was the last of her kind, and her 4 eyes were finally closed. But the story didn't end there. Stories never really end. They just turn into new stories. 5 years later, the galaxy was a completely different place. The Compact of Free Peoples had grown to over 300 member species. Trade routes that had been locked down for 1,000 years were bustling again. Scientists from dozens of worlds were working together on projects no single civilization could have dreamed of. There were arguments, sure, fights too. Once there was even a small war that had to be carefully negotiated before it got out of hand. But for the most part, the Compact worked. The old Concord remnants had dwindled to a few bitter, isolated star systems, refusing to admit their time was over. Vasquez knew they'd probably cause trouble for generations to come. Old empires don't die quietly, but their threat shrank with every passing year, and humanity had changed, too. We were no longer tied to one planet or even one corner of space. We were scattered across hundreds of systems, a true galactic diaspora. That war had taught us something about ourselves. We discovered we loved to explore, to build, to meet new people, and figure out how to get along. We were still messy sometimes, still prone to anger and stubbornness and all the flaws we've had since we first climbed down from the trees. But we were also kind and curious, and always trying to be better, and maybe that was enough. Maybe it had to be. Elena Vasquez stood on a balcony back on Earth, gazing at the star-filled night sky. She was an old woman now, with white hair and a face etched with the lines of a long, hard life. She'd stepped down as Secretary General years ago, passing the torch to younger hands. Now she was just a retired politician who gave the occasional speech and wrote memoirs that very few people actually read. But sometimes, on clear nights like this, she'd look up at those stars and remember. She remembered the sheer terror she felt telling the conquered no. She remembered the crushing weight of 1,800 names after the Battle of Kepler 138. She remembered the desperate chaos of the evacuation, the soaring hope of the rebellion, and that strange, unbelievable moment of triumph and grief when the lighthouse broadcast changed everything. She couldn't shake the ghosts. On a night like this, standing on the balcony overlooking a peaceful capital city, they were louder than ever. She remembered the faces of the flight crews who held the line just a few seconds longer, buying time with their own lives. She saw the colonists, families who packed a single bag and vanished into the deep dark, hoping to survive. She heard the soldiers fighting battles they knew were hopeless, not for victory, but for the slimmest chance that someone else might get away. A sharp voice broke the silence. "Still sentimental, Elena?" It was General Thorne's daughter, a politician who believed her father's iron fist philosophy should have won. "They're calling you a fool, you know, saying you're leaving us vulnerable." Elena didn't turn. "My father died for this vulnerability," a new voice said. It was Captain Sarah Chen, the daughter of the late, great Admiral Chen. She was young, full of fire, and commanded one of our best ships. She held a data slate. "Ma'am," she said to Elena, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this." "It's just Elena now," Vasquez said with a gentle smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "What have you got?" The young captain's face was a mixture of excitement and worry. "We got a message. From the Outer Rim. It's a new species, ma'am. Totally new." Elena felt a familiar jolt. First contact. Their technology is basic. Maybe 500 years away from faster-than-light travel. But they've picked up some of our old deep space signals. She paused, taking a breath. "They have one question for us." Elena waited. "They want to know if we're coming to conquer them." Vasquez let out a long, slow breath. The question hung in the air, a ghost of humanity's own past. She smiled then, a real one this time, tinged with sadness, but burning with pride. "Tell them the truth," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Tell them we're just coming to say hello. Tell them their future is their own, that their choices are their own, and that they are free to become whoever they want to be. And tell them, if they ever need a friend, all they have to do is ask." She looked up at the endless stars. "Tell them that's what good neighbors do." Captain Chen nodded, her eyes shining with understanding, and quickly left to send the message. Vasquez stayed on the balcony, her gaze lost among the distant, glittering suns. She pictured it, a world she would never visit, a people she would never meet, learning at this very moment that the great, silent emptiness wasn't empty at all. They must be terrified. They must be wondering if the giant waking up next door was a monster or a friend. Oh, how she wished she could tell them everything, that the universe, for all its darkness, was so much warmer than it looked. That there were people out here who vividly remembered being young and outmatched and scared. People who had sworn on the graves of their friends that they would never, ever make anyone else feel that way. But that was a lesson they would have to learn for themselves, in their own time. For tonight, it was enough. It was enough to breathe the cool night air and know the galaxy was shifting, that the idea of freedom was spreading like light from a new star, one solar system at a time. The dream of a universe where everyone could stand as equals was, piece by painful piece, becoming real. This wasn't the end of the story, not by a long shot, but it was a beautiful chapter. And there, in the quiet darkness, Elena Vasquez finally let herself feel it. Something she hadn't felt since before the wars. Peace. Not the brittle, false peace of the old Concord, bought with silence and fear. This was real peace. The kind that settles deep in your bones after a hard job is finally done. After a sacred promise has been kept. It was the peace of someone who had helped heal the universe and could, at long last, rest. Above her, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, and across 1,000 worlds, in 100 different languages, people were saying the words that had become their greeting, their prayer, their unbreakable vow.
Freedom is always worth the fight.